Mm. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how the people who were supposed to love me tried to erase everything I had ever built. On Christmas Eve, my stepmother looked me in the eye across the dinner table and told me I had 48 hours to get out. My father sat right beside her and said nothing. What happened in the weeks that followed nearly destroyed me. They froze my accounts, forged documents in my name, and used my little brother as a weapon to keep me silent. They had been planning it for months, and they almost won. The Christmas tree was lit when I walked in that evening, all white lights and gold ornaments, the kind of careful, curated decoration that my stepmother spent 3 weekends on every year. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon candles. It should have felt warm. It didn't. It hadn't felt warm in years. My brother Danny was sitting on the stairs when I came through the door, 19 years old and already looking like he was bracing for impact. He gave me a small nod. I gave him one back. We had learned to read each other's signals a long time ago. My father was in the living room with a glass of scotch. My stepmother, Renee, was moving between the kitchen and the dining room with the focused energy of a woman performing a role she had rehearsed too many times. She barely looked up when I came in. Dinner was quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, that presses down on everyone at the table. Danny pushed his food around his plate. My father refilled his glass twice. I kept my eyes down and ate. Then Renee set her fork down with a deliberate click and folded her hands on the table. She said, "Claire, your father and I have talked about this for a long time, and we think it's best if you find your own place. You have 48 hours. I looked at my father. He looked at his glass. I had been paying the mortgage on that house for 2 years. After my father's contracting business collapsed and Renee's boutique started bleeding money, I had quietly stepped in. I covered the mortgage. I paid the utilities. I filled the refrigerator. I did it because Danny was still in his first year of community college and I didn't want his life upended. I did it because some part of me still believed that family meant something. I said, "Dad." He said, "Renee's right. It's time." Danny's chair scraped back from the table. He left the room without a word. I sat there for a moment very still, the way you go still when your body needs a second to catch up with what just happened. Then I stood, folded my napkin, and walked down the hall to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I had learned a long time ago that arguing with Renee in front of my father was like arguing with a wall while someone kept moving it. I packed what I could that night. I made sure my laptop came with me. I made sure my hard drives came with me. I made sure my portfolio drives came with me, every single one, because I am a freelance graphic designer and my work is my entire livelihood and I was not going to give them anything else to take. Danny knocked on my door around midnight. I opened it and he stood there looking younger than 19 and older than he should have been. He said, "She's been pushing for this since October." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Don't be. Be careful." I left before sunrise. My friend Jess lived across town in a 2-bedroom apartment she'd been renting alone since her roommate moved out. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd been listening for my car. She handed me coffee and didn't ask me to explain anything until I was ready. That was the thing about Jess. She understood that sometimes people needed to sit in a room quietly before they could talk about what broke them. I sat on her couch and looked at my phone. No messages from my father. No messages from Renee. One from Danny. "Are you okay?" I typed back, "I will be." Then I opened my banking app to check my savings, just to ground myself, just to see the number and know I had a runway. The balance was wrong. I stared at the screen. I refreshed it. I stared again. $12,000 was gone. Jess saw my face and came around the counter. I turned the phone toward her and watched her expression shift. I called the bank. I sat on hold for 11 minutes and then a representative came on and walked me through it, and what she told me made the room tilt. Someone had initiated 3 wire transfers the night before from my linked savings account. The transfers had been authorized using my login credentials and my security question answers. My father knew my security questions. He had helped me set up that account when I was 22. I said, "I need to freeze everything right now," and she did, and she flagged it for fraud, and she told me to file a police report, and I hung up and sat there with my hands shaking in my lap. Jess said, "Claire." I said, "He took my money." She said, "How much?" I said, $12,000. The silence that followed was the kind that fills up with everything you want to say and can't. The police report took 2 hours. The officer was thorough, at least, and took screenshots of everything I had. He told me the investigation would take time. He told me I had done the right thing by acting quickly. He told me to monitor my credit. I nodded at all of it and drove back to Jess's apartment feeling hollowed out. Danny called that evening. His voice was low, like he was somewhere Renee couldn't hear him. He said, "Dad's been telling people you stole from them." I gripped the phone. "He what?" "He's calling relatives. He's saying you spent years taking money from the household account and then ran when they confronted you. Aunt Patricia called me asking if it was true." The ceiling of Jess's living room swam a little. I breathed through it. My father was not just punishing me. He was managing the narrative. He was poisoning the well before I could speak. I thought about letting it go. I thought about staying quiet and rebuilding in silence and cutting them off completely. But then I thought about Aunt Patricia calling Danny. And I thought about every cousin and family friend who would hear this story and believe it, and I thought about what it would mean to let him define what happened. I opened my laptop and I wrote a post. I kept it factual. I kept it calm. I said I had been financially supporting that household for 2 years and had been asked to leave on Christmas Eve, and that I had discovered money missing from my account the following morning. I said I had filed a police report. I said I was not looking for sympathy. I said I was establishing the record. I hit post. My phone lit up within the hour. Some people were kind. Some were skeptical. And then there were the family members, 2 cousins and an uncle, who sent messages telling me to keep family business private, that I was embarrassing everyone, that my father was devastated. I didn't respond to any of them, but something else started happening. Small things. At first, a car I didn't recognize parked outside Jess's building 2 evenings in a row. A notification that someone had tried to log into my email. A text from an unknown number. "You should think carefully about what you're doing." I showed Jess. She said, "That's not your dad. He doesn't write like that." She was right. My father communicated in grunts and guilt. This message was precise, deliberate. Someone else was watching. I changed every password I had. I enabled 2-factor authentication on everything. I told myself I was being careful, not paranoid. Then Danny called again, and his voice was different this time. Tight. Scared. He said Renee filed something with the court. I said, "What kind of something?" He said, "A petition. She's trying to have herself named as my legal guardian. Financial guardian. She says I'm not capable of managing the trust money." I went cold. My mother had died when I was 17 and Danny was 6. She had left a small trust, not large but enough to pay for his education and get him started. The trustee was supposed to be me, the designated adult guardian named in my mother's will, until Danny turned 21. I had been managing it carefully for years. What Renee was filing would cut me out entirely. I drove to an attorney's office the next morning. Her name was Diane, and she was sharp and practical and did not waste time with reassurances. She read the filing and looked at me over her glasses. She said, "They're claiming you've been mismanaging the trust funds. They've attached documentation." She slid papers across the desk. The first document was a bank statement showing withdrawals I had never made. The account number was close to mine, but not mine, 1 digit off. Whoever created this had been careful. The second document was worse. It was a letter supposedly written by me, addressed to a financial advisor, authorizing the transfer of trust assets into a separate personal account. My signature was at the bottom. I had never written that letter. I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not panic. Something colder than panic. I looked at Diane and I said, "That signature is forged." She said, "I believe you, but we need to prove it." I called Danny from the parking lot. He answered immediately. I said, "Did you see Renee working on documents, anything involving the trust?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's been using Dad's home office a lot. She locks the door." I said, "Has she said anything about where you'd go to school next semester?" Another pause. "Longer this time," he said. "She mentioned a program, out of state. She made it sound like it was already decided. My hands went still on the steering wheel. This was not about punishing me. This was about removing me as trustee so she could access the trust money. Danny was not a person to her. He was a count with a balance. That night, Jess found me at her kitchen table at 2 a.m. with every document I had spread out in front of me. She said, "You need to sleep." I said, "She forged my signature to steal from my brother's trust fund." Jess sat down across from me and looked at the papers for a long time. She said, "Then let's figure out how to prove it." We worked until 4. We built a list, contact the financial advisor named in the forged letter. If I never sent it, they'd have no record of receiving it. Pull the original trust documents from my mother's estate attorney to establish the real account numbers. Request a forensic handwriting analysis. Subpoena Renee's home office printer logs if it came to that. I also did something Diane had not asked me to do, but that I knew I had to. I called my mother's estate attorney, Mr. Hensley, who had handled everything after she died. He remembered me. He remembered the trust. And when I read him the account number from the forged document, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Claire, that account doesn't appear anywhere in your mother's estate records. Someone had manufactured it from nothing." The next morning, I brought everything to Diane. She moved quickly. An emergency motion to halt the guardianship petition. A request for forensic document review. A letter to the court flagging the discrepancy in account numbers. And then, 3 days later, another blow. I was at Jess's apartment when my credit monitoring app sent an alert. Someone had applied for a personal loan in my name, $22,000. The application had been submitted using my social security number, my date of birth, my address, my old address, the house I had just left. I called the lender and froze it before it processed. I called the credit bureaus. I filed a second police report. Jess was standing in the doorway watching me work through it, her arms crossed. She said, "This is coordinated. Your dad doesn't have the patience for this. Who else is involved?" I had been asking myself the same question. I went back to the bail records, because 3 weeks into all of this, my father had been arrested on the original fraud charges related to the stolen $12,000, and then inexplicably released within 48 hours. I had assumed Renee had posted bail, but Renee didn't have that kind of liquid cash available. Her boutique had been running at a loss for 2 years. I started searching public records, court filings, third-party bail bondsmen. The name that came up stopped me cold. Marcus Doyle. I didn't know Marcus Doyle. I didn't know Marcus Doyle. I had never heard that name in my life. But when I searched him, I found a businessman with significant real estate holdings across the county, including, I noticed, a commercial property on the same block as my father's old contracting office. A property my father's business had leased for 6 years before it collapsed. And when his business collapsed, according to the court records I found, there had been a dispute, unpaid rent. My father had alleged the building had structural issues that voided the lease. Doyle had alleged my father owed him 4 years of back payments. The case had been dropped, but apparently Marcus Doyle had not forgotten. I called Diane that evening and told her everything. She said, "So Doyle may have approached your father, offered to back him financially, bail, legal fees, in exchange for what exactly?" I said, "Maybe he wanted leverage. Maybe he knew about the trust. Maybe he knew about the trust. Maybe he thought if Renee got control of it, there'd be something in it for him." She said, "That's a theory." I said, "I know. I need proof." That night I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. A man's voice. Measured. The kind of calm that is practiced. He said, "Ms. Claire, you're asking questions about people who would prefer you didn't." I said, "Who is this?" He said, "Someone who would like this to be over quickly and cleanly for everyone." I said, "Are you Marcus Doyle?" The line went dead. I sat in the dark of Jess's living room with the phone in my hand. Then I texted Danny, "Are you safe?" He responded in 30 seconds, "Yes, why?" I said, "Stay that way. Don't tell Renee anything." The next morning I woke up to a message from Danny, sent at 2 a.m. I found something. In Dad's office. The door wasn't locked all the way. He had taken photos. He sent them to me in a series of 12 images, slightly blurred from his hands shaking but legible. Emails between my father and Marcus Doyle going back 5 months. Discussions about the trust. How much was in it? How it was structured? who had access, a reference to the daughter problem, and at the bottom of one exchange, a number, a wire transfer amount. Doyle had paid my father directly. There was also a contract. 2 pages, signed by both of them. My father had agreed to help Doyle manufacture evidence against me, evidence that would remove me as trustee and allow Renee to petition for control, in exchange for Doyle covering his debts and legal costs. My brother had been reduced to a financial asset in a deal between 2 men who had never once considered what it would cost him. I called Diane at 6 in the morning and she picked up on the second ring. I said, "I have everything." She said, "Come in now." By 8 a.m., we had filed a criminal complaint against both my father and Marcus Doyle, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, financial exploitation. By noon, Diane had submitted the evidence to the court and the guardianship petition had been suspended pending investigation. By 3 in the afternoon, Danny had packed a bag and Jess had driven him to my apartment and he was sitting at my kitchen table eating cereal like the world hadn't just been pulled out from under him. He looked up at me and said, "Is it over?" I said, "The worst part is." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I sat beside Diane with the folder of evidence on the table in front of me. My father sat across the room looking older than the last time I had seen him. Renee was not there. She had hired her own attorney and was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge. Marcus Doyle's attorney was present, but Doyle himself was not, which told me everything I needed to know about how confident his legal team was feeling. Diane presented the case methodically. The forged letter, the manufactured account number, the emails, the contract, the wire transfer. The judge was a woman in her 60s who listened to all of it without expression. When Diane finished, she looked at my father's attorney and said, "Does your client have anything to add?" His attorney said no. The judge said the guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice. She said the fraudulent documents would be referred to the district attorney. She said the trust would remain under my management pending a full audit. She said my father's bail was revoked pending the new charges. I watched them lead him out of the courtroom. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had spent weeks imagining this moment, and I thought I would feel something large and dramatic. Instead, I felt tired and clear, the way you feel after a fever finally breaks. Outside, Danny was waiting on the courthouse steps. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was watching me come down the stairs with an expression I couldn't quite read. He said, "Mom would have hated all of this." I said, "Yeah, she would have." He said, "She would have been proud of you, though." I didn't say anything to that. I just pulled him into a hug and held on for a second, and he let me, which for a 19-year-old boy is really saying something. Jess was parked at the curb. She rolled down the window when she saw us and said, "Well," I said, "it's done." She said, "Get in the car. I'm buying dinner." Marcus Doyle was indicted 6 weeks later. His attorney attempted a plea arrangement, but the district attorney's office declined. My father accepted a plea deal, 3 years probation, full restitution, and a fraud conviction that would follow him for the rest of his life. Renee's charges were reduced to a single count of filing a fraudulent legal document. She lost the boutique trying to cover her legal fees. The trust was audited and found to be exactly as I had maintained it. Every dollar accounted for. Danny used the funds to transfer to a 4-year university the following fall. He called me on his first day of classes and said the campus was bigger than he expected and he was nervous and also a little excited, and I sat in my apartment and listened to him talk about it and thought about my mother and what she would have wanted for him, and I let myself feel that fully. Just for a minute. There is a version of this story where I kept quiet, where I absorbed the accusation, stayed out of it, let Renee file her petition, and let my father tell everyone I was the villain, and let the narrative settle into something I could never correct. I understand the temptation of that version. It would have been quieter. It would have been easier, at least at first. But my brother's future was in that trust, and the truth was mine. If you are carrying something right now that someone else put on you, a lie they told, a reputation they manufactured, a version of you that has nothing to do with who you actually are, I want you to know that silence is not always safety. Sometimes speaking is the only thing that keeps you from disappearing. I am still here. I did not disappear, and neither will you. When I walked out of that courtroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter than that. Something closer to relief, The kind that settles in slowly, like the air after a long storm finally passes. I had spent weeks being told in one way or another that I was wrong about what had happened to me, that I was the problem, that my memory was unreliable and my character was suspect and my claims were the product of someone too emotional to see clearly. And I had held on anyway, not because I was fearless. I wasn't. But because the alternative, silence, erasure, letting the lie become the record, was something I could not choose. What my stepmother and my father did not happen because they were uniquely evil people. It happened because they believed I wouldn't fight back. Every decision they made was built on that assumption. The forged documents, the manufactured accounts, the attempt to strip me of my role as my brother's trustee. None of it would have been attempted if they had believed I was capable of standing up. The moment I stopped performing the role they had assigned me, the compliant daughter, the quiet one who paid the bills and asked for nothing, their entire plan began to unravel. That is not a coincidence. Our choices build the conditions we live inside. Theirs built a trap, and the trap caught them. I think a lot about what it means to act with integrity when the cost is high. It would have been easy, at every step, to find a reason to back down. The first police report felt almost absurd, reporting my own father. The morning I filed the criminal complaint against both him and Marcus Doyle, my hands were shaking. But I have come to understand that integrity is not something you possess in calm moments when nothing is at risk. It reveals itself specifically in the moments when doing the right thing is genuinely hard and genuinely costly. That is the only test that counts. My brother Danny is the reason I kept going when I wanted to stop. Not because I was protecting him in some heroic sense, but because watching someone you love be reduced to a number in someone else's financial scheme does something to you. It clarifies things. The question stopped being about me and became about what kind of person I was willing to be when it mattered. I already knew what kind of people they were. The only thing left to decide was what kind of person I was. I am not the same person I was before Christmas Eve. I don't think that's a bad thing. I understand now that the people who try to diminish you are almost always operating from fear. Fear of what you represent, what you might do, what you might say. My strength was threatening to them long before I ever used it, and that tells you something important. You don't have to earn the right to stand up for yourself. You already have it. You had it before they ever tried to take it from you. If you are in a situation right now where someone is rewriting your story, manufacturing your failure, or counting on your silence to protect their lies, I want you to hear this clearly. The truth has weight. It doesn't always move fast, and it doesn't always move easily, but it moves. And the people who build their plans on the assumption that you won't fight back have already made their most critical miscalculation.